of what is the sports season here for sports radio gabbers like myself and out on the internet and everywhere else as the Ravens open training camp on Thursday. But around the world, it's the silly season. Copa's over, Europe's over, all of that stuff is over for soccer. But here come the Olympics, here comes doping and Russians and passing PP through walls in Sochi. And we got Zika, we've got violence, we've got political corruption, we've got international corruption, and we've got Marty Conway here, the good professor from Georgetown University, and my longtime pal who at one point ran the Orioles business, ran the Rangers business in Major League Baseball, and now sits on the side and tries to teach these young people about the business of sports. And Marty, I don't want to be too negative here, especially on the back end of a Republican convention that was mostly negative and a Democratic convention that who knows how it turns out. But, boy, there's just a lot of cheating and a lot of gamesmanship and a lot of lying and a lot going on in sports that sort of leaks over. And if it's not policed, well, the Russians will pass urine through walls, right? I mean, we've learned that, right?
Yeah, we'll do anything. And I think the important thing to note is how did we learn about this? We learn about it through two ways, not through the standard, World Anti-Doping Agency investigations or things like that. We learn about it from two ways. Number one is whistleblowers, and two, in-depth investigative media reporting. I mean, it proves the value in the short and the long term of having a really, investigative, inquisitive, inquiring media presence, not just in the U.S., but around the world. Otherwise, we would not be talking about this, because it was literally 3 years ago in 2013 where this began to be whispered around about through the media. And then eventually the World Anti-Doping Agency, as you're referring to about the Russians, was frankly shamed into launching an investigation which led to what we've learned over the last year, which is this unparalleled and unprecedented state-sponsored cheating and cover-up within athletics, primarily around the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympics that were hosted a couple of years ago by the Russians.
Well, it's just unbelievable to me that the Olympics and FIFA sort of operate somewhere in the halls of justice, I guess, Marty. I don't know who the hell runs them or who brings them to justice. Obviously, the United States has gotten involved with FIFA, but, 3/4 of the countries in the world were involved in cheating in FIFA and buying off, World Cups. I mean, if you're not peeing dirty in the cup, you're taking, you're taking some sort of handshake or an envelope of money back to your country. It really is amazing how in-depth the corruption is, how systemic, how endemic it is, and how maybe it's human nature, dude. I don't want to get all Freudian on this, but if you can, you will. If you can't, you must. And if you're not sure, well, here, rub a little bit of this on, or take this shot, or take this pill. It'll make you faster or stronger or better. We'll figure out a way to cover it up. There's just so much of that that's gone on all of our lifetimes, really, right? We're going back to the East Germans back in the 70s, right?
Yeah, and the best thing to do is understand organizations like FIFA and like the IOC. They operate in what I describe to students as almost like principalities, right? They're not really nation states, although they behave in ways as if they almost have a royal family or monarchy head, so almost like a principality. So, and what happens is when you have those types of scenarios with lack of oversight, no one throughout the international sport federations or throughout countries throughout most of the rest of the world thinks that the IOC or an organization like FIFA has any real oversight. And as I mentioned earlier, they don't have investigative organizations. They don't have investigative groups. When something is thrust upon them by a London paper or somebody in the United States or the U.S. Department of Justice, that's when they act. And at that point, usually they're chasing the story, and the media learns, we learn more from the media than we do from their investigative bodies. So in that respect, it's not surprising. It's the way that they have operated now for decades. The question will be is, should they change? We had Scott Hamilton down at Georgetown a couple of weeks ago, and we asked Scott Hamilton, kind of the type of question, tell us something that we don't know, or tell us something that what happened in the future that might surprise us. And here's a former gold medalist who's still involved in the Olympic movement throughout the world, and he said, I think that in my lifetime, and he's somebody I think in about his 50s, he thinks that in his lifetime that the Olympic movement, the Olympic Committee, the entire Olympics will look completely different by the time he leaves this earth. And what he means is that there's been such a lack of transparency and such a pace, they've lacked the pace of change in terms of their governance, that he thinks that international sport federations or other organizations will step forward and pretty much usurp the Olympics. And if you look at it, if you look at Rio, what's happened in some of the sports like golf and tennis and some other where athletes just aren't going. Now, I know that there's a Zika threat and there's some other things, but to a golf,
these guys don't need it, though. These guys have $50 million or $100 million. They're not all about glory or necessarily even their country. Many of them don't even live in the country that they were born in or they allegedly represent. They sort of like hang out somewhere near Orlando usually, right?
Yeah. But the key thing is that as you see these international sport federations and other organizations are going to step forward, and the more that they host a world championship or some other sort of made for TV event, whatever, the Olympics, essentially what the Olympics are, and this is sometimes hard for people to get their arms around, but every other year we don't have the Olympics. We have the World Championships in these 26 or 28 individual sports that they host in the Summer Olympics.
And no one notices them, by the way. When Michael Phelps is swimming in Oklahoma, no one notices, right?
Only when you put them together and get everybody in the same city for 2 weeks, essentially the international sport federations, which is why the IOC has kicked this whole issue of banning the Russians off to the international sport federations like track and field or swimming or basketball to make the decision. That is that once they get there in the city, those international sport federations run the entire competitions. And the IOC and the local organizing committee doesn't have anything to do with actually running the competitions themselves. All the rules, all the judgments, all those decisions are made by the sport federations. So save for some of these sport federations deciding to come and really being a part of this, that's what actually contributes. So the question is, in the long term, organizations like the IOC and others, what do they really own? And if somebody other than television isn't feeding them money or corporate sponsors, what do they actually have? So that's the provocative way to look at it. I don't know that it's going to change in a big way in 4 or 8 or 12 years, but if I had to say 16 or 18 or 24 years, I'd say, yeah, I think the chances are that it may be something different at that point, just by nature of the way that they are tied together and what it looks like in Rio.
Marty, it is unbelievable, though, as much money as Michael Phelps has made for NBC and is for himself as well, that all of these athletes, much like March Madness, right, when, the 15 seed has a point guard that, goes to some small school that we've barely heard of and can't name their mascot. These kids aren't getting paid, but CBS is making a bunch of money, and TBS and the NCAA. It's kind of similar with the Olympics, right? All these people are coming to get together down in Brazil. They're getting handed a couple of condoms as they come in the front door, and they get some food and a nice little party. Most of them go home without medals. Most of them go home having made nothing. Most of them go home having spent 15 years of their lives trying to get to this point. And meanwhile, there's some executive in Zurich or Geneva somewhere, who's hanging on a $4 million annual salary to put the thing together and go sit in a box somewhere, right?
Yeah, and increasingly, and I would add to that, too, that the lion's share, the majority of these athletes who will meet in Rio, many of them have to raise their own money to get there. So, again, apart from track and swimming and gymnastics and a few of the things that you might typically see on television, there's a whole host of other things that are canoeing and kayaking and all sorts of other rowing and other areas where these athletes have to generate and raise their own money to go because their sport federation literally has barely any revenue. So whether it's snowboarding in the Winter Olympics or canoeing and kayaking in the Summer Olympics, these athletes are taking it upon themselves to raise the kind of money that they need.
Yeah, if you're the Jamaican bobsled team, you need 10 grand from Red Stripe just to get up on the mountain, right? Period. Right?
Which is why when you have gaps and inefficiencies like that in markets, you see people step forward to fill that gap. In many cases, they're agents or other people that represent and say, you know what? So you the canoe or kayaker or snowboarder, we've got some other ways for you to monetize your opportunity. And before you know it, you have something like the X Games, and pretty soon we'll have, the X Games for canoeing and kayaking or whatever, because not only is there a market for it, there's a television market for just about everything today. And that's what hopefully we'll get an opportunity to talk about with the UFC sale, because what it shows is the value of live sport programming, both the event and the television delivery of it itself, and how much cash was generated for that and what they sold the business for.
He is the good professor from Georgetown University, and my pal Marty Conway. Always a pleasure to have him on. One of my favorite people. You can follow his journey out on LinkedIn at Marty Conway or on Twitter at Marty Conway, and he is an active blogger out on the LinkedIn sphere of his days as a sports executive with the Texas Rangers, as well as here with the Baltimore Orioles, now at Georgetown, and traveling back and forth to Qatar and all that stuff. Marty, I don't want to get too Freudian on all this, but I've been a little deep in depth this week just in general. My mom's turning 97, and it's my anniversary, so I'm having deep thoughts. The Olympics, I look at it and say most of these American cities don't even want it anymore. This year curling's not involved, so why am I going to watch it this summer? But there's a whole part of the cheating part of this that plays the good cop, bad cop thing. It almost feeds into it in a news cycle where scandal sells, and this is a nice little juicy scandal for Bob Costas to come on the Today Show at 8 o'clock in the morning and talk about leading up to it. It's almost like the mosquitoes are part of the story that makes this richer. The fact that it's a banana republic down there and they can't figure out who's running the country, and the police are all mailing it in down there, and it has a reputation of being a little dodgy. And I almost think it's like a NASCAR race where people kind of want to tune it in and see if something weird happens.
Well, the importance of, and this is why, that is that beyond 2022, none of those locations have been decided. So it's actually unprecedented for a media organization to bid to a sport organization for games or events or league, whatever it is, that not only haven't been played yet, but they don't know where they're going to be played. So that tells you how important it is to own the rights to something like that. So it's a bit of a Spanish sort of telenovela, right? It's the soap opera. What you're talking about is the narrative. And I believe that between these discussions of the narrative of Zika and the Russian Federation banning track and field and all these other areas, in addition to the kinds of promotion that Comcast, Xfinity, and NBC are driving, you'll see ratings that will far exceed anything they've done in the past. Although the setting is questionable, the Brazilians are facing incredible economic and political strife from hosting these games. I think that organizations like NBC Universal and other broadcasters are going to reap the rewards of the piqued interest in what's going on down there. And when you switch it on starting on Friday night and the opening ceremonies, they're quickly going to start promoting. You mentioned some of those stars, the Michael Phelps, the Gabby Douglas in gymnastics, the Missy Franklin in swimming, and Katie Ledecky, and all these other. There's about a dozen or 24 stories, some that we haven't learned about yet, who might be track athletes that have been doing it for 15 or 20 years, or a 16-year-old gymnast. Those are the kind of things that sell in the media culture. And from talking to media folks and being in the media business, the personality piece is really what is interesting. The NFL would be nothing except for some of the personalities that we know between Joe Flacco and Aaron Rodgers and other big names like that. So this is what will happen. I believe that the ratings and the business of the Olympics has never been better for the media. Yes, at the local level, hosting these events, it's a near financial catastrophe for cities that are bidding, to the point where when the 2022 Winter Olympics were awarded to Beijing, it got to the point where there were only 2 bidders left. Everyone else had pulled out for fear of risk of economic and political distress that it might cause in the country.
Marty Conway, the good professor from Georgetown. There are other things going on besides Rio and obviously NFL training camps and that, but on the business side of things, I have many guests here from Yahoo. My wife is a longtime Verizon employee, and they've been incredibly kind with her through her battle with leukemia twice, so I want to give a shout-out to them, and they make my cell phone work. Now, the bigger get bigger, right? These mergers and these stories, there's a whole sports bent involved with this Verizon Yahoo part, right?
Yeah, Verizon is acquiring Yahoo for about $5 billion, acquiring all their assets, all their real estate, a number of things. And they're going to combine what they've acquired through Yahoo with their recent acquisition of AOL, which they acquired about a year and a half ago. And they're going to take those two entities and combine them together. And yeah, Verizon is moving quickly to change the landscape. 15 years ago, Verizon was a landline phone company, pretty much it. Then they ventured pretty aggressively into wireless technology, and now they have the position that you mentioned earlier, along with AT&T and maybe one or two others. And now they're making an aggressive move into online content. And when you think about Yahoo, there's really three areas. And when I was at AOL for 13 years, we actually had very interesting conversations and near acquisitions and near mergers and relationships with Yahoo. Not once, not twice, but about three different times during that 10 or 15-year period. And that is the brands that Yahoo, Yahoo for three things, really. Many people, over 1 billion people, still go to a Yahoo homepage of some sort to start their online journey, whether it's search or whatever. And then the other two brands are, as you mentioned, Yahoo Sports and Yahoo Finance, where they've actually acquired sort of a consumer-centric leadership role where Yahoo Sports has ventured into radio, they've ventured into other areas beyond just online. And this is the culling together, the sort of consolidation of the big brands that in the 2000s there were dozens and dozens of these. But what's happened is that Google and Facebook have pulled so far ahead. Google and Facebook now generate 75% of all online advertising revenues, both mobile and online, actually come to either Google or Facebook. Everyone else is fighting over the other 25%. That other 25% is valuable enough that a company like Verizon has said, well, if we can't be first, or we can't be second, perhaps we can be third and be the dominant third-place player. So it's a very significant move. It's going to take close to a year to close, and I think you'll see a lot of moving pieces back and forth. But it's a significant move and puts Verizon out there with Comcast as the two companies that are making the transition from the old line media, whether it was cable or landline phones, as quickly as they can move into online and interactive areas. And so, as you start to think about who are the leaders going to be going forward for, bidding on NFL rights beyond the current list of Fox and ABC and ESPN, you're going to see organizations like Verizon start to step forward now because they have a place where they can deliver this kind of stuff.
Marty, last thing for you on baseball, which was your bread and butter and kind of where you cut your teeth in the industry before you went to the online space and now as a professor down at Georgetown. Running the Orioles, running the business department, making business transactions and sales and skyboxes and all that stuff that really kind of came to pass during your era in the late 80s and early 90s as we transitioned from Memorials into Camden Yards. First off, Oriole Park this weekend, much more full, much more vibrant as you would expect with the first place team. But the giveaways are still this incredible thing. And I had a Jones for the Jim Palmer jersey, because, I'm of that age. I'm the old white guy that doesn't remember 66, but certainly my dad did. And I love Jim Palmer, and I love the style of the jersey. So I bought a ticket on Sunday, ventured up to the ballpark, got there at, 5 minutes to 1. They were out of all the jerseys. And from what I understand, there's a line around the building because these giveaways have become the reason to go. I saw more people leaving the stadium as I was walking up wearing Palmer jerseys, and with a handful of them they were taking back to sell to some guy like me on eBay for $40. It's become a profit center for fans. It's kind of insane when you think about it, but I experienced it, and I bought the ticket, wanted the jersey, went to get the jersey, didn't even go to the game, and I couldn't get the jersey. I'm not bitching about it because it's a $10 jersey. What do I care? But it really is kind of like these giveaways have become a real Maw's delight for a certain segment of the fan base. And I find that interesting in a pennant race that is sort of the backup plan. If the team wasn't any good, there still probably would have been 35,000 people there on Sunday to get the Palmer jersey, right?
Yeah, well, the giveaway, the premium items work specifically or even listening to the promotion number of people on a Thursday night. Do they have, instead of having 22,000 people on a Thursday night, do they have 32,000 people on a Saturday night? Do those 10,000 people just get moved over to 2 or 3 other giveaway nights. And that's the question. If the Orioles have done their analysis and they see that there's actually true incremental attendance, then it makes sense. The second part of that is acquiring the corporate sponsor to actually underwrite whatever those giveaways are. I see that the Orioles increasingly have done a number of giveaways where there actually is no corporate sponsor. Now, I think they had one this past week for the Palmer jersey.
Yeah, UMBC, one of my clients, one of my sponsors, great friends of ours, UMBC 50, I think it was.
Figurines and other things where they don't have it, and the question there is, does the cost of that premium item, which can be anywhere between $2 or $3 in the bulk that they're buying, does that amount of money, $40,000 or $50,000, do they generate something back for that? Now, on the other hand, there are some organizations that view these premium and giveaway items as just another way, like you were saying earlier, to engage the fan base, give them something in return for their loyalty, whether they keep it, sell it, whatever their choice is. But they're an important part, and particularly in baseball, because of the length of the season and the number of games that you have. How do you induce people to go from 3 or 4 to 5 or 6 times, because the amount of money that they spend in parking, concessions, and other things is meaningful. So it's a big thing in baseball. You don't see it very much, obviously, in football. You see it occasionally in hockey and basketball, but baseball and minor league baseball in particular have their reputations built on the giveaway. But that's sort of the art and the science behind it, if you will.
Well, and then there's the whole notion that you're going to have a throwback jersey night and your starting pitcher is going to go into the clubhouse and with a knife cut up all of the jerseys. I mean, I've heard of some insubordination, and I can't imagine when you were running the Orioles if that would have happened on the Eddie Murray, throwback night, that he decides he doesn't want to wear the orange jersey and cuts them all up. I mean, I've never heard of such a thing, but from a business perspective for the White Sox, an incredible embarrassment on top of all of their losing this year, and they have a surly star player now. That's ugly, ugly times for the business of the Chicago White Sox this week, right?
Yeah, I read that, and I obviously my eyebrows raised because having been in that world long enough to know, and actually we were one of the first organizations, one of the first groups to start doing those kind of turn back the clock, throwback type things. So they're 20, 25, going on 30 years old now. And there's a couple of anecdotes that I can share with you. So one of the first times we did it, we were going to do a throwback to an early Orioles 66, whatever it was. Well, the reality of the uniforms during that time was they weren't synthetic, they weren't nylon, they were all these sorts of things.
They were wool, man. I felt those things. They were nothing you wanted near your skin on a warm day, let alone a 99-degree day, right?
Yeah, and the first couple times that we did it, we didn't really take into account the players' performance while they were wearing whatever it was they were going to be wearing. And quite frankly, some of the players actually spoke up. I mean, Chris Sale's not the first guy to do this. Spoke up and said, "Look, these are just awful. Like that, I can't throw, I can't run, I can't do these sorts of things in them." So, in addition to that, all the players in spring training are fitted down to the inch for what they want. Some like to wear their pants long, some like to wear them short. All different varieties to do it. Some have it taken in. All these sorts of cosmetic kind of adjustments that they like to make. And so, when you're running these kind of promotions, the first person that you have to take into account is the manager, number one, to get his sign-off on this. And then number two, the player, or at least the head of the players' union in the clubhouse, or people like that. Now what you're seeing is teams are doing this 3 and 4 and sometimes 5 times a year, maybe at home. And then when the teams are on the road, they're also trying to outfit that visiting team to correspond or complement what the home team is doing. So I think you're seeing that this is just one very visible example of it, where the players are actually saying, wait a second, our performance is on the line. If you're Chris Sale and you pitch 30 times out of a 162-game season, every one of those starts matters. So I think there was probably some frustration. Generally speaking, when you see something like this, it's not the one incident that he's responding to. There must have been some other incidents along the way that he either kind of got perturbed about or raised questions about, and then he walks into the clubhouse, sees this again, and says, look, this isn't the 1975, it's not 1982. we're trying to struggle here just to stay relevant or stay in the pennant race. So I think it's just one act and it's just one player and one circumstance. But I think it does shed some light on these kind of promotions that impact player performance. No one is going to be upset when they're giving away a Jim Palmer T-shirt night or a bobblehead, but players can tend to get upset when you deal with something that specifically relates to their performance, their contract, their bonus, their incentive, all the things like that. So it may be nothing, it may be a one-off, but it also may be a little bit of a hot canary in the coal mine for the kinds of things that clubs are doing.
Marty, always appreciate your time, man. I know you're having a great summer watching the Birds and the Nationals, a couple first-place teams here in the district. We haven't talked much about a Beltway World Series yet, have we? It's probably because these teams haven't seen each other yet, and they will down the line here.
Yeah, and again, we'll start to, like I said, when do we start to take this seriously as to potentially, whether division winners or at the very least playoff teams, could they meet? 60, 70 games is a long way to go in Major League Baseball, but generally speaking, you start to think about this around the beginning of September, once the trade deadline is come and gone, once the call-up roster is sort of come and gone, they start to look at this in September. At least I know that's when Major League Baseball and others, they start to bring in their front office folks around the middle of August, depending if the team has been there before or not. But definitely by early September, they start casing the place for hotels and transportation, and they will definitely be looking at what's the prospect of a World Series in between two cities so close together like they've had in the past in L.A. and New York. And, wouldn't it be interesting, because not only that, but it would be an election year. You have a lot of other things going on. So generally speaking, these things, tend not to happen, but if they did, it certainly would be unique in this area, especially in the Washington corridor, with an election year coming up as well. So,
yeah, we got political conventions, corruption in Rio in the Olympics, Orioles in first place. And by the way, the NFL, it feels like it went away for a little while. I mean, we've all wondered when the NFL would exhale. It feels like I have not felt real NFL news in quite some time, which puts Goodell right back on the hot seat beginning Thursday or Friday, right?
Yeah, with the advent of training camp, and hopefully at some point in the future we'll talk about the value of training camp, some of the things that other organizations are doing to generate revenues, and where I think that looks like it could position the Ravens down the line for things that they're going to have to do or likely to do in order to stay, quote-unquote, competitive in the revenue race. So I think there's some opportunities out there, and we'll see what happens.
Well, maybe we'll talk about that next week on The Big Show, Marty. Have a great week. Enjoy the baseball. Enjoy the nice weather, and we'll check in with you again soon.
Okay, you got it. Thank you.
He is the great Professor Marty Conway of Georgetown University and longtime executive with the Rangers and the Orioles, as well as Major League Baseball. Lives here in Maryland. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Marty Conway or on LinkedIn, where he blogs and tweets occasionally with some great wisdom about sports, the business of sports, and how it all ties together. I'm Nestor. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, as well as the Bio Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. You can tune us in, listen what you want, where you want, when you want, how you want. Just download that TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Big thanks to our friends from buyatoyota.com for sponsoring that. I'm out on the internet. I'm definitely going to be watching the Orioles all week, and Luke and I will be at training camp in Owings Mills beginning Wednesday night as Joe Flacco takes the podium, and Thursday morning when John Harbaugh brings them in pads onto the field, and the whistle sound and the crack of the pads and all of that good stuff. We'll have it all for you. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.